Welcome back and thanks for tuning in. Now that I have the table saw extension done, it's time to work on a new fence for the saw. And to that end, I need some new rails. The rails that originally came with the saw, well, they were fine for the first little while. But the garage got banged up and rusty, and in time it just became more of a nuisance to use them to set up the fence than it was as a convenience. So I just ended up stopping using it altogether, and eventually just took it off. Now, the bolts, which screw right into the cast iron of the table saw, they're perfectly fine. So I think what I'll do is make a new fence that attaches that way as well. And the easiest way of doing that, without trying to blindly set up where to cut the holes, is I thought I'd do is take a piece of scrap acrylic here, cut it to the size of the spot that's going to go. And because I can see through it, because it's even with the protective coating on it, it is translucent enough that I can see where to mark it. So what I'm going to do is designate an end, because it's not the right size as far as the thickness of the table saw goes. It is just square at the top. So I'm going to mark one end, and then I'm going to take the bolts out, hold that in place, and mark it all up so I know exactly where to put the holes. Now, to make sure I don't put it too high or too low or whatever, I'm going to just move this piece of wood over, and it makes a perfect guide for marking the height for this, because I don't want it obviously to go past the top of the saw. So this is actually kind of useful. I mean, it was kind of nice that I had this scrap. I picked it up for free a long time ago. I put in a big order for some acrylic, and while they're cutting that, I asked if they minded. I went through their scrap bin and picked a few pieces out. And this is one of the few pieces that was left over, so I haven't used it in, well, I actually can't remember to tell you how long ago it was that I picked it up. But now it's going to get some use, and it's just, like I said, it's a very easy way of guiding where I want the holes to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill holes in this. I'm going to start off with one. I'm going to bolt that in place, make sure it is level and it clears the top of the saw. Make sure that the second bolt hole that I'm going to drill next is where it needs to be now that I've actually drilled one of them, and so on and so forth until I have all three done. So it doesn't really actually take that long. It didn't take me more than, say, about half an hour to set this all up. I do have to be very careful with it, because if it's off by even a small amount, it won't fit. It just won't be able to, I won't be able to screw it in. As it turns out, it was a very good time saver, because on the other side, I have to do the exact same thing. And fortunately, two of these holes match up perfectly fine with the holes in the back. Unfortunately, the last hole, I don't know why, they just repositioned it. There are a couple of holes that aren't being used on the front end, and I assume it was just a matter of certain ones that they wanted to drill and certain ones they tapped, and I don't know. Anyway, one of them is in a different position in the back, but because the other two were perfectly fine, and as you're going to find it as this progresses, worked out really well, I didn't have to worry about the positioning of those. I just had to bolt these into place on the back, and then just mark the third hole. So as you can see, as it turns out, I wanted just a little bit below where the top of the saw is. I don't want any interference. And it worked out very well. I was very happy with this. It came out quite fine. And the nice thing about it is even from one end to the other, which is the most important thing. Now, in the initial clip I showed you, there's something that I didn't notice when I first started putting the table saw extension together. And that is the extension that came with the saw is off by a little bit. And I didn't notice that when I was making an extension. I just made it to the same size as the existing extension. So it is a little bit of a gap there that I'm going to have to compensate for. So now that I have that all done, and I need I need the rails, right? So I'm going to use this hard wood plywood that I had. It was used in another project, and I took it all apart. And I thought because it's old plywood, it would work really quite well. And like I said, I haven't really had much issue with old hardwood plywood having voids in it. Unfortunately, this did not turn out to be the case for this. So I have a bit of a gap. I had used this for creating some doors, so there's hinges. That's what those that little bevel you see there, and of course the screw holes. So I wanted to trim that off, so I attached a piece of just plain old plywood on one end, and then I used that as a straight edge to be able to saw that off. So it really works well. I mean, you got the gap here on this side, and you end up with a nice straight edge on the other side. And as you can see so far, I mean, it looks perfectly fine. But unfortunately, once I reset this, oh, this, by the way, is what I use for a fence now. It's just a piece of 2-inch angle aluminum, and it's 1/4-inch thick. So it's nice and solid, and I just use 2 clamps to firmly set it in place. It works perfectly fine. It just takes forever to set up, of course, because I have to make sure I adjust both ends, and every time I move one end, it kind of changes the measurement on the other. But anyway, it works, and it's fine for most things, except, of course, if I'm doing lots of cutting. So I'm not going to bother showing you the rest of that, because this is what I found when I cut the old plywood out. It's just not possible to use this. It's just too ratty on the insides. So instead, I decided, which I don't normally do, is I went out and bought some 1x3, which is relatively inexpensive. Each of the rails is going to cost me only about $6, which is fine. I'm not doing it out of hardwood, of course, because that would change that $6 into $30, and I really didn't want to do that. So this is going to be out of pine. I don't think it's going to be a problem. It is 3/4 inch thick, so it should be solid enough. But anyway, this is what I can afford, so this is what it's going to be. So I'm taking the template, and I'm just going to tape it on. I could use double-sided tape, of course, but it doesn't really stick well to acrylic, and I just want to make sure it held down. And again, it's not really that big of a deal as long as it doesn't move. And it's set up here nice and flat on the mill, and all I need to do is just turn it like this, just to make sure it's nice and centered, and then hold it down and drill through. And as long as I don't shift it, or which basically means all I have to do is just be gentle with it, all I have to do is just drill all the holes. And this turned out way better than I could have possibly have hoped for. It didn't require any re-drilling. Everything worked out perfectly fine. And then, as I said, just a matter of screwing that in place, which you're going to see in the next clip. And like I said, it turned out really nicely. And normally what I would do when I am drilling this sort of thing, because I am going to countersink things, so those bolt heads have to be inside this, because this is going to act as a rail. And normally what I would do is I would clamp this all in place, and then what I would do is change over to, in this case, a Forstner bit to do the countersink for the bolts. But I wanted to make sure, like before I go to all that trouble, I want to make sure it fit. So I'm going to do it a slightly different way, as you're going to see here in a few moments. As you see, the holes are nice and clean. That's obviously not a problem to set up. So I'm going to go over here, and then I'm going to screw it in place, make sure everything fits. And because it's going through 3/4 inch, it has to be precise, because the holes, as you see I'm putting them in here, they fit through, but there's no real wiggle room. And like I said, it turned out way better than I could possibly have hoped. It just screws in nice and easily. No effort, no trying to fiddle with it. It just goes in. And the one on the far right is the one that doesn't really matter, because it's not threaded, it is bolted, and the hole I cut is larger than well, the bolt, so it's there's enough wiggle room there that I don't have to worry about it. So this is how I need to do the countersink. This Forstner bit here is actually perfectly the right depth for the bolt head, which is nice, because I don't have to set a stop on this or anything. I can just go straight down to the bottom. And because I'm using the original bit to drill through this, it is very easy to line it all up again, and of course put the bolt in, make sure I just drill down until I have the right depth, and that's all there is to that. It's very easy to do. The only thing I had to make sure I did in this case, of course, is it had to be, everything had to be clamped down nice and solid, because there's no guide for the Forstner bit, because the hole's already been drilled. But as you can see, it worked out perfectly fine, and there you go. Those are the 3 bolt holes. I will not do the ones in the back on camera. I'm just gonna, you'll see that in the next video. The next step for this, of course, is to make the track that's going to go underneath that the fence is going to sit on. But probably what I'll do first instead of that is actually make the fence, because I need the fence to ride ever so slightly above everything so that there's no friction there. There probably will be a bit anyway, but I want to eliminate as much as possible. So there you go. All bolted, no, sorry. It's not bolted in place. It is just lightly, not snug enough so that it doesn't wiggle around. It is not tightened down at all. I am going to have to probably take this off several times, and there's just no point in putting extra stress on the wood. So there you go. Leave comments, let me know what you think. Oh, and of course the other thing I need to do is cut a groove for my crosscut sled. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next video, and bye for now.